On a Thursday in October, I sat in my truck across the parking lot of the Port Royal Grill and watched my wife of 29 years climb into another man's car. She was wearing the pearl earrings I gave her for our 20th. She had told me she was sitting with her sister, who has been dead since March. I did not go over there. I did not honk the horn. I picked up my phone and took a picture because 31 years of investigating fires teaches your hands to keep working after the rest of you quits. Then I looked at the screen and saw who was holding the door open for her. My son. The boy I raised from the time he was 4. Standing on the curb with his hand on the handle, smiling at the man, taking his mother to dinner. Here is the part I have never told anyone. I was not surprised by my wife. I was not surprised by my son. I was surprised by the car, because I had seen that license plate before. It was sitting in a box in my garage in the corner of a photograph I took at a crime scene in 1998, the night a man burned to death, and I signed the paper that called it an accident. 27 years, 14 feet from my lawnmower, and I had never once let myself look. My name is Walter Brennan. I am 57 years old, and until 18 months ago, I investigated fire loss for a regional insurance carrier out of Charleston. 416 fires. That is not a figure of speech. I kept a log the way you keep a log when you are young and think the number will mean something someday. What that job teaches you is that fire is honest. It cannot lie about where it started. It leaves a V pattern on the wall pointing back at its own origin like a finger. Char depth tells you how long it burned in one spot. Glass tells you how fast it got hot. You read backward from the ruin to the first minute, and if you are patient, the first minute is always still there, waiting for you. People lie. Buildings do not. I sat in that parking lot for 11 minutes after the silver Mercedes pulled out onto Rebo Road. I know it was 11 because I looked at the clock when they left, and I looked at it again when I finally put my hand on the gear shift. That is another thing the job does to you. You stop experiencing time and start measuring it. The house was quiet when I got back. It usually was. I put the truck keys in the dish by the door the way I have for 29 years, and I stood in my own kitchen like a man waiting to be let in. There was a casserole in the refrigerator with a note on it in her handwriting. Heat at 350. Don't let it dry out. I have stood in wet ash and told a widow what her husband's last 4 minutes looked like. And I could not for anything work out how a woman writes a note like that in the morning and gets into a car like that at night. So I ate the casserole. And I did not ask. Rosalind came home at 11:40. I heard the car door, then the screen door, then the particular sound her shoes make when she takes them off in the hall because she does not want to wake me. 29 years and she still did that. It is a small kindness, and I sat in the dark of the front room and let it land on me like a stone. She came into the kitchen and turned on the light over the stove. Not the ceiling light, the little one, and started wiping down a counter that I had already wiped down at 7 o'clock. That is her tell. I have known it since 1997. When my wife is telling me something that is not true, she needs her hands somewhere else. "You're up," she said. Couldn't sleep. "How was your night?" "Quiet." I watched her run the cloth along the same 18 inches of tile 3 times. "How was your sister?" Her hand did not stop, I will give her that. 29 years of marriage and the woman had better nerves than most arsonists I have interviewed. "She's all right," Rosalind said. "Tired." There it was, on the table between us in a kitchen that smelled like her lemon cleaner and my dinner. I have sat across from men who set fire to their own businesses with their families asleep upstairs. I have watched them describe the smoke alarm they never installed. And I have never once in 31 years wanted to look away from a liar until that moment. Marguerite Pruitt Rosalind's sister died in March. I carried one corner of her casket. It rained and my shoes were ruined, and afterward Rosalind sat in the truck in the funeral home parking lot and cried against my shoulder for 20 minutes with her hand in my shirt pocket. She had just used that woman to cover an evening out. I could have said it right then. 2 words. She's dead. I want to tell you I stayed quiet because I was building a case. That is what I told myself standing there, and it had the shape of the truth, which is the most dangerous kind of lie there is. Here is what actually happened. I looked at my wife's back and at the thin place in her hair at the crown where she has always been self-conscious. And I did the thing I had been doing in that house for a very long time. I decided not to look. There are men who would have crossed that kitchen. There are men who would have put the phone on the counter with the photograph already open on the screen and let it sit there glowing between the salt and the pepper. I have met those men. I have taken their statements in the parking lots of buildings they set fire to. And I have always thought there was something almost restful about them, the way there is something restful about anybody who has stopped negotiating with himself. I have never once been one of them. What I said was that I know. She turned around. I want to be precise here because precision is the only thing I have ever been good at. Her face did not go white. She did not drop the cloth. What happened was smaller than that and worse. For about a second and a half, my wife looked at me the way you look at a smoke detector that has started chirping. A small irritation, a thing that will have to be dealt with, an interruption to a plan already in motion. Then she smiled. You know what, honey? And I heard myself say, I know you're tired. Go on to bed. She kissed the top of my head. She smelled like somebody else's cologne and her own shampoo at the same time, and I sat in that kitchen chair and let her do it. I listened to her go up the stairs. I listened to the water run. I listened to the bed take her weight through the ceiling above me. And I sat downstairs in the dark with my hands flat on the table, like a man waiting for a verdict. 31 years I spent teaching insurance adjusters and county investigators and juries how to read a room after the fire went out. Where it started, which way it ran, what it wanted. I taught a seminar on it twice a year in Columbia. There is a slide in that presentation, and I have shown it maybe 200 times, and it says this: the first question is never what burned. The first question is who was in the building. I sat in my kitchen that Thursday night and understood the way you understand a thing you have known for years, without ever saying it out loud, that I had been living in a house that was on fire, and I had been the one holding the extinguisher. Dean's truck pulled into my driveway at 7:04 the next morning. I know the sound of that truck. A 2016 Silverado with a bad idler pulley that has needed replacing since February. I was standing at the sink with a cup of coffee I had not touched, and when I heard it come up the gravel, my first thought was not anger. My first thought was that the boy had gotten up at 6 to drive out here, which meant somebody had told him to. In 31 years, I have interviewed a great many people, and I will tell you the single most useful thing I ever learned. It is not how to spot a lie. Anybody can spot a lie. It is how to keep your face still while somebody tells you one, because a man who knows he has been caught tells you nothing, and a man who thinks he is winning tells you everything. I put my coffee down, I put my face on, and I went to the door. Morning, Walt. He has called me Walt since he could talk. Not Dad, not Pop, Walt. He came to me at 4 years old with a fever and a stuffed rabbit missing one ear, and I sat up 3 nights with that child in a rocking chair in a rented duplex on Bay Street, and he calls me Walt. I want to be honest about something. I never asked him why. 27 years I had to ask that question. He was too little. He was a teenager, and everything was a fight. He was in college. He was getting married. There is always a reason not to ask a question you already suspect the answer to. And I have made a career out of understanding that impulse in other men and never once turning the lamp around on myself. You're up early, I said. Couldn't sleep. He came in and went straight to the coffee maker like he lived there, which he had for 18 years. Where's Mom? Still asleep. She get in late? And there it was, at 7:06 in the morning. Before either of us had sat down. He was not asking. He was checking. He wanted to know what time she had come home, because he wanted to know how long she had stayed, because he had been standing on that curb with his hand on the door, and he had not gone in with them. 11:40, I said. Dean nodded and poured his coffee, and did not ask where she had been. That is the thing about people who are lying to you. They are so busy managing what they say that they forget to manage what they fail to ask. An innocent man wants to know where his mother was until 11:40 at night. Dean wanted to talk about the weather. So we talked about the weather. 4 minutes of it. Rain coming Sunday, they said, though the sky did not have it in her. We talked about the idler pulley, and I offered to fix it, and he said he would bring it by sometime, the way he has said it since February. Then he set his cup down and reached into his jacket. So listen, he said. I want to show you something, and I want you to not get worked up about it. There is a particular sentence people use right before they hand you a document, and that was it. I have heard it in insurance offices and hospital hallways and once in a burned-out motel lobby in Walterboro. Don't get worked up. It means I have already made the decision and I have come to manage your reaction to it. He put a folded piece of paper on the kitchen table and smoothed it flat with the side of his hand. It was a property valuation. Our house, the one my wife and I bought in 1998, with a VA loan and a down payment that took 4 years to save, appraised at a number I had to read twice. It was 41% over anything on this street has ever sold for. That's not a real number, I said. It's a real offer. It's not a real number, Dean. Look at the comps. Bledsoe's place went for $220 in June, and he's got the water view. We don't have the water view. Nobody's buying the view. He sat down across from me and he leaned forward, and I watched my son do a thing I had seen 100 men do across 100 tables. He softened his voice to deliver the part he had rehearsed. Somebody's assembling the whole block, all of it down to the marsh. They're paying over market because they need every parcel and they don't want to spend 2 years in negotiation. That's it. That's the whole story. It's not a trick. Who's assembling it? Does it matter? It matters to me. Dean sat back. He looked at the paper on the table, and then at the window over the sink, and then he did the arithmetic I could see him doing. Whether to give me the name now on his terms, or let me find it later on mine. Walt, I'm going to say something, and I want you to hear it the way I mean it. He turned his cup a quarter turn on the table. You're 57. You had a heart attack. You're retired on a pension, and Mom's working reception at a real estate office because the two of you cannot make the numbers work anymore, and everybody in this family knows it except you because nobody wants to say it to your face. He was not wrong. That is the thing I need you to understand about my son. He was never wrong. That is what made him so hard to answer. This is enough money for both of you to be all right, he said. Whatever happens, however it goes. You should think about Mom. You should think about Mom, he said it gently. He said it the way you say a kindness, and I sat there in my own kitchen and understood that my son had just told me, in the softest voice he had, that his mother was leaving me, and that he had known before I did, and that he had come here at 7 in the morning to make sure the house money was on the table before that conversation happened. He was not warning me. He was positioning me. Who's buying Dean? He held out for another second. Then he shrugged, like it was nothing, like it was a name off a mailbox. Marchetti. Gil Marchetti. He's got a coastal development group out of Bluffton. I have been asked more than once what it feels like to hear something like that. People expect me to say the room went quiet, or the floor tilted, or my ears rang. None of that happened. What happened was that a filing cabinet opened in the back of my head, the good one, the one that has never lost a thing, and out came a manila folder I had not touched since the Clinton administration. Ellery Street, September 14th, 1998. Warehouse total loss. 1 fatality, night watchman, male, 41. Adjacent parcel owner of record, G. Marchetti. 1 line. In a 340-page report I wrote with my own hands. I had typed that name myself. And then I had let it lie there for 27 years like a coal under wet leaves. Walt. Dean was watching me. You all right? You went somewhere. I'm fine. I picked up the valuation and folded it along the crease he had made and handed it back to him. Tell him I'll think about it. That was the first lie I told anybody in this story. I wanted on the record that it was mine, and that I told it to my son, and that it came out of me as easy as breathing, because I was not going to think about it. I was going to go out to the garage. There are boxes people do not open, and the reason is never that they are heavy. Mine sat on the top shelf of the garage on the left, behind a bin of Christmas lights and a coffee can of drill bits I have not used since my hands started shaking in the mornings. Cardboard file box, banker's box they call them, lid on. Nothing written on the side, which is itself a thing worth noticing, because every other box in that garage is labeled in my wife's square handwriting. I put a hand on the shelf, and I did not take it down. I want to be exact about the length of time, because the length of time is the only honest part of this. I stood in my own garage with my hand on that shelf for 19 minutes, long enough for the coffee to go cold in the kitchen. Long enough that a car went by, twice the Sanderson girl doing loops on her learner's permit. Long enough for a man to understand something about himself that he has been managing not to understand since Bill Clinton was in office. A house fire that has been smoldering inside a wall does not announce itself. It eats the studs from the inside and puts nothing in the air but a smell you can convince yourself is the neighbor's burning leaves. And then one day somebody opens a door on the wrong side of the house and gives it oxygen, and the whole thing goes up in 4 minutes. I had been smelling something in my own house for 27 years. I took the box down. The carrier let me keep my file copies when I retired, and I had brought home 11 boxes in 18 months. 10 of them are in the crawl space. This one I put in the garage where I would walk past it, which is a thing I have never explained to myself and am not going to try to explain now. I carried it to the workbench and cut the tape with a utility knife and lifted the lid. Ellery Street. September 14, 1998. 340 pages. 11 weeks of my life. 206 photographs, 60 of them seen. The rest, documents and depositions. Interview transcripts with the property owner, 4 employees, 2 responding engine companies, and the widow. And on top where I had left it, the report cover sheet with my signature on the line. Walter J. Brennan, Senior Field Investigator, License 4471. I have a decent hand. My mother made me practice. That signature is the same one on my marriage license and my daughter's birth certificate. And I looked at it that morning and had the specific sensation of reading a stranger's mail. I sat down on the shop stool and started at page 1. Here is what nobody tells you about reading your own work from 27 years ago. You do not find mistakes. Mistakes would be a relief. What you find is a man being careful. Page 11. Point of origin consistent with electrical failure in the northeast quadrant, though pattern development is atypical. Atypical. That was the word I chose. I sat on that stool in my garage and read that sentence 4 times, and I could feel the 29-year-old man who wrote it standing just behind my shoulder, and I knew exactly what he was doing, because I have caught other men doing it, and I have testified against them. He was building a door. You write atypical, so that if it comes back on you in 5 years, you can say you flagged it. You write, though, so that the sentence has a hinge in it. It is not a lie. That is the thing. Nothing in that report is a lie. Every sentence in those 340 pages will survive a deposition, and I know that because I wrote them too. Page 47. Char depth at the north wall inconsistent with reported timeline. Measurement may be affected by suppression water. Maybe. Might have been. Cannot be excluded. I went through 80 pages that way, and by the end of it my hands were doing that thing again, and I had to put the pages down flat on the bench and press them with my palms. I was not a bad investigator. I want to say that plainly because I have spent a fair amount of the last year deciding whether it is true. 416 fires, and I never had a finding overturned. In 2009, I stood in a courtroom in Orangeburg and took apart a hotel owner who had killed 2 people, and I did it on char depth and a window latch. I was good. That is what makes it worse. A careless man leaves a bad report behind him. A good man leaves a report that is careful in exactly the places where he did not want to go. Page 109 in the section titled Adjacent Property and Access. Parcel 114B immediately east is a graded lot with no permanent structure owner of record G. Marchetti Beaufort. No commercial activity observed. Owner not interviewed. No indication of relevance. No indication of relevance. 3 words. In my handwriting on the draft and my typing on the final. I put that page down on the workbench and I sat in my garage and I did the thing I had spent 31 years telling juries to do. I stopped asking what the document said and started asking what the man who wrote it was avoiding. A parcel owner immediately adjacent to a fatal fire. Not interviewed. Not because he was cleared, not because there was an alibi in the file, because I checked and there is no alibi in that file, and there is no line anywhere in 340 pages explaining why the man who owned the ground 14 feet from the east wall was never asked a single question. No indication of relevance. That is not a finding. That is a decision. There was one more thing in the box at the bottom, under the transcript binders, and I knew it was there before I touched it, because I remembered putting it there. A death certificate, photocopied. County of Beaufort. Reyes Esteban Alonso. Male. 41 years of age. Employed coastal storage and freight night security. Cause of death, smoke inhalation. Manner, accident. Accident. I had held that word in my mouth for 27 years and never once tasted it. The man had a name. I had typed his name maybe 400 times in 11 weeks. And then the file closed, and the boxes went to storage, and I went home to a wife and a 4-year-old boy and a daughter 3 months old, and I did not think about Esteban Alonso Reyes on his birthday, or at Christmas, or in the small hours when a man's own house is quiet. That is the confession. Not that I got it wrong, that I got it comfortable. I put the lid back on the box, but I did not put it back on the shelf. I set it on the workbench where I could see it, and I stood there in the cold with the door up and the morning coming in gray off the water. And I understood that I was going to have to look at the photographs. 60 scene photographs. I had shot most of them myself, and there was one of them I could not have told you the number not yet. But I could have told you it existed, that I had been walking past in my own garage for 18 months. There were 60 scene photographs in that box. I have looked at 59 of them very closely. I want to explain how a thing like that is possible because it sounds like a confession of incompetence, and it is not. It is worse than that. Scene photography in a fatality case follows a discipline. You shoot in rings origin, then the room, then the structure, then the block. The last ring is called context. It exists because a defense attorney will eventually ask whether you considered the surrounding environment, and you want to put a photograph in front of the jury. Nobody looks at the context ring. You shoot it, you log it, you number it, and it goes in the file. 27 years in that work, and I could count on one hand the number of times a case turned on a wide shot from the end of the street. Photograph 11 is a context shot. Ellery Street looking east, taken at 6:12 in the morning on September 15, 1998. About 7 hours after the fire was knocked down. I remember taking it. It was cold for September, and I had not slept, and my film was almost out. I laid the photographs across the kitchen table in numerical order, 6 rows of 10, the way I have laid out 100 sets, and I sat down with the desk lamp from the hall, dragged over on its cord, because the light in that kitchen has never been any good. It was 2 in the morning by then. Rosalind was asleep upstairs. That detail matters to me for reasons I did not understand until much later. I went through them in order. Origin. The burn pattern up the wall studs the V I had called atypical in 1998 and would call something else now. The collapse of the mezzanine. The loading bay doors both closed, which is in the report, and which nobody ever asked me about again. I got to 11 and my eye went past it, and I made myself go back. Ellery Street looking east, wet asphalt. The engine company still on scene, hoses out. 2 men in turnout gear at the edge of the frame. A utility pole. And parked on the right shoulder 60 or 70 yards down, half in the frame and half out of it, a car. In my report, in the photograph log, in my own typing, vehicle unidentified, right shoulder. Not associated with response. Not associated with response. That is the whole entry. I sat there and looked at that car for a long time. Here is what I had told myself for 27 years, if I told myself anything at all, which mostly I did not. A fire on a commercial block at 4 in the morning draws people. In 11 weeks, nobody in a canvas mentioned a car on the shoulder. The fire department did not log it, and it was 60 yards outside the scene tape in a photograph taken on 400 speed film in bad light. Every word of that is true. That is what I mean when I say a good man leaves a careful report. I took my reading glasses off and put my face closer to the print. The car is dark. In the photograph, it reads black. But 400 speed film in early gray light will eat a silver car and hand you black every time, and any investigator who has worked a night scene knows it. 2-door. Long hood. A shape that was already dated in 1998, the boxy German ones, the kind a certain sort of man keeps and will not trade, because the car is not transportation. It is a statement about who he was the year he made his first real money. And on the back of it, angled toward the camera, because the car was parked facing away, a plate. I could not read it. Not with my eyes and not with the desk lamp. What I could see was that it was short. Too short. South Carolina passenger plates in 1998 ran 3 letters and 3 numbers, 6 characters, and whatever was on that bumper had a gap in the middle and not enough on either side of it. A vanity plate. I got up from the table. I went out to the garage in my house shoes and came back with the loop I have carried in the same pocket of the same field bag since 1996, and I sat back down and put it on the print, and I put the lamp right down on top of it. GM 1962. I sat back in the chair. GM 1962. I had seen that plate 17 hours earlier at a distance of about 90 feet on the back of a silver Mercedes in the parking lot of the Port Royal Grill, with my wife's hand on the door and my son's hand on the handle. The man had kept the plate. Of course he had kept the plate. Men like that keep the plate. It is not a plate, it is a signature, his initials and the year he was born. And he has moved it from car to car for 4 decades because it says the same thing in every parking lot in this county. I have been here a long time and I am not going anywhere. I sat at that kitchen table with the loop in my hand, and I did the arithmetic that a man in my line of work does without meaning to, and it came out the same, no matter which way I ran it. Gil Marchetti's car was parked 60 yards from a fatal fire at 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 hours after it started, on a block where he owned the adjacent lot. And I photographed it, and I logged it, and I wrote, "Not associated with response," and I closed the file. I did not discover anything that night. Nothing new entered that house at 2 in the morning. The photograph had not changed. The plate had been on that print in that box, on that shelf in my garage 14 feet from my lawnmower, every single day of my daughter's life. I had not missed it. I had declined it. There is a difference, and I have spent 31 years explaining that difference to juries, and I had never once had it explained to me. Upstairs, the floor creaked. Rosalind getting up for water the way she does around 3. And here is the thing I have to put down honestly, because if I leave it out, then none of the rest of this means anything. I could have gone up those stairs. I had the photograph and the loop and 17 hours of a lie about a dead sister sitting in my chest, and my wife was awake and 40 feet away, and 1 flight of stairs was the entire distance between me and the truth. I put the photographs back in the box. I turned off the lamp. I told myself it was because I was building a case. Because you do not walk into an interview without your file in order. Because a man gets exactly 1 first question, and if you waste it, you never get it back. All of that is procedure, and I have taught it in a classroom in Columbia twice a year for 11 years. But I had a wife upstairs getting a glass of water, and I chose the box. That was the 4th time in 27 years I decided not to look. It was not going to be the last. There are 2 men alive who worked the Ellery Street fire. I am one of them. The other retired 4 years before I did, moved 40 minutes inland to a house on a dirt road outside Yemassee, and stopped answering his telephone. Cyrus Dunmore hired me in 1994. He was the senior field man for the Carriers Coastal District, and I was 25 years old with a fire science certificate and no idea what I did not know. He taught me to walk a structure counterclockwise. He taught me that the first person to hand you a theory is the person to look at hardest. He carried 1 corner of my father's casket in 2003. My daughter calls him Uncle Cy, and has never once been told he is not related to us. I did not call ahead. You do not call ahead on an interview you care about. The house sat back off the road, behind 2 pecan trees, with a pair of hounds that came off the porch at the sound of my tires and lost interest halfway across the yard. There was a truck under a tarp that had not moved in a long time. The gutters needed doing. Cy's wife Elna died 14 months ago, and I went to the service, and I had not been back since. And standing there looking at those gutters, I understood something about myself that had very little to do with fires. He came out before I got to the steps. 66 now. Thinner than he was. He had one of those vape pens in his hand. the little black ones. And he was holding it the way a man holds something he is embarrassed to be holding. Elna made me quit the real ones, he said. Then she went and died. Now I've got this thing and no reason for it. Sigh. Come on up. Coffee's from this morning. We sat on the back porch. It faces a stand of pine and a drainage ditch and nothing else. And there was a wind coming through that had October in it. He did not ask why I was there. That is the thing about a man who spent 40 years taking statements. He knows better than to give you a question to answer because a question is a rope and people climb them. So I let it sit. 4 minutes, maybe 5. 2 men on a porch, not talking. Then I opened the folder on my knee and took out photograph 11 and set it face up on the table between us next to the coffee. Sai looked at it. I want to be precise about what happened next because I have thought about it more than almost anything else in this story. He did not lean forward. He did not pick it up. He did not ask what he was looking at or where it came from. And he did not do the thing every innocent person does, which is put a finger on the print and say, "What am I looking for?" He looked at it for about 3 seconds. Then he set the vape pen down on the table, and he looked out at the pines, and he said, "I know." The wind came through. One of the hounds got up under the porch and turned around and lay back down. "You know what I said. Don't do that." He said it gently. "Don't work me, Walt. You're not good enough at it, and I'm too old for it. You know what's in this photograph. I know there's a car on the shoulder with a vanity plate on it 60 yards east, and I know whose it is, and I have known since about the 3rd week of that investigation." He picked the pen back up, looked at it, put it down again. "Sit down, you're standing up like you're going to arrest somebody." I had not noticed I had stood up. I sat. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes into a man when the thing he has been braced for turns out to be true. People expect noise. In my experience, there is no noise. There is a settling the way a burned structure settles a day after the fire. A beam drops 2 inches and finds where it was always going to end up. I had driven 40 minutes out to that house with a theory that Cy would look at the photograph and go pale and say, "My God, Walt, how did we miss that?" And the two of us would be 2 old men who made one bad mistake in 1998, and we would spend the winter fixing it together. I had built that on the drive, and I had liked it very much. "You knew in 1998, I said. "I knew in 1998. And you didn't put it in the file." "No." "And I didn't put it in the file." Cy turned and looked at me, then straight on for the first time since I got out of the truck. He has pale eyes. He always did. In an interview room, they used to work on people like a lamp left on. "Walt," he said, "who do you think told you to close it?" I sat on that porch with my hands on my knees and my coffee going cold and the wind coming up out of the ditch. And I went back through 11 weeks of 1998 the way you go back through a structure looking for the thing you walked past on your way in. 3rd week, a Tuesday. The carrier's regional office in Charleston, a conference room with a water stain on the ceiling shaped like Ohio. Cy came in and sat on the edge of the table the way he did, and he said something about resource allocation and about how a fatality file with a soft origin finding is a file that eats a young man's career. And then he said the sentence I have carried for 27 years without once taking it out and looking at it in the light. "You've got a wife and a brand new baby girl son. Write it clean and let it go." I had remembered that as kindness. I had built a whole life on top of remembering that as kindness. "You want to know why?" Cy said. It was not a question, and he did not wait for me to answer it. He reached over and turned photograph 11 around on the table so it was facing him instead of me, and he looked down at that car on the shoulder like a man looking at a grave he dug himself. "All right," he said. "Sit still. This is going to take a while, and you're going to want to hit me before I'm done." Cy started in 1991, 7 years before the fire, which is not where I expected him to start. "You know what the carrier's coastal book looked like when you came on?" he said. "You don't. You were 25, and I gave you the good files because I liked you. Here is what it looked like. Hugo came through in '89, and we paid out on 11,000 claims in this district in 18 months. By 93, corporate had the whole coastal operation on a watch list. 2 field offices in Georgia closed. Beaufort was next, and everybody in that building knew it. That's a budget story, Cy. Every story is a budget story. You've been retired a year and a half and you already forgot that. He picked up his coffee, found it cold, put it down. In 1996, they sent a man down from Hartford to sit in the back of our office for 6 weeks with a legal pad. Didn't say a word to anybody, just watched. When he left, the district manager pulled me into a room and told me what the pad said. Our cycle time was too long. Our reopen rate was too high. We had a reputation for pursuing files past the point of commercial return. That's a compliment. It reads like one in a book about firefighting. It reads like something else in a spreadsheet in Connecticut. The hounds had gone quiet under the porch. There was a truck out on the county road somewhere downshifting. So September of '98 comes, Cy said. A warehouse on a graded block nobody has cared about since the freight yard closed. Total loss and a body. The policy limit is $840,000, and the reserve gets posted at full limit inside a week because a fatality file always does. And you, 29 years old, 3 weeks in, sharp as a tack, God help me, you come into my office and put a photograph on my desk. I brought you the photograph. You brought me the photograph. I did not remember that. I want to be honest about that. In 27 years of not thinking about Ellery Street, the version I had built and put away was one in which I had missed it. That was the version I had been carrying around in my chest since 2 o'clock that morning, and it had a certain shape to it. And I had been managing that shape all the way up Highway 21. I had not missed it. I had walked it into my supervisor's office and set it down in front of him. What did I say? I said. You said there's a car sitting on the shoulder at 6 in the morning, 7 hours after knockdown. And it's not a fire company vehicle, and I want to run the plate. And you said, I said run it. Cy's jaw moved. That's the part nobody would believe. I told you to run it, Walt, and you did. And you came back the next day with a name and a parcel record showing he owned the lot immediately east, and you were lit up like a boy at Christmas, and I sat there and looked at what you had, and I understood exactly what it was. Evidence. 6 months. He held up a hand and started counting on it, the way he used to at a scene. Subpoena the man's phone records, that's a fight, and the carrier's counsel bills $3.40 an hour to have it. Depose him, he brings his own lawyer, and Marchetti had a lawyer in 1998. He was not a nobody even then. Canvass a commercial block for witnesses at 4 in the morning, where the only people out are the ones who don't want to be talked to. Pull a comparison burn, because a soft origin finding on a fatality doesn't survive cross without one. And a comparison burn costs $11,000 and takes 9 weeks. He put his hand down. 6 months, $140,000 in outside spend on a file, where the carrier is going to pay the limit anyway, because there is no exclusion that helps them. And at the end of 6 months, you have a car on a shoulder. That's what you have. Not a can, not a print, not a witness. A car 60 yards away in a photograph, on a block where the man owned the dirt. There was a man dead in that building. There was a man dead in that building, Cy. I know what was in that building. He said it quiet, and it landed harder than if he had shouted it. You think I don't know his name? I know his name. I have known his name every day since. I know he had a girl 7 years old, and I know his wife went back to Hardyville because she could not make the rent here, and I know the church took up a collection that came to $416, and I know the number because I put 100 of it in myself, in an envelope. Like that meant something. The wind came through. Neither of us said anything for a while. So I made a decision, Cy said. I decided the office survives and the file closes. And then I did the worst thing I have ever done in this trade, and it was not the decision. It was how I sold it to you. You told me I had a wife and a baby girl. I told you that. He nodded slowly. I gave you a reason to do the wrong thing that let you keep thinking of yourself as a good man. That's the trick, Walt. That's the whole trick. You don't corrupt a man by offering him money. You offer him a reason to stop looking that sounds like love. I sat there on that porch, and I felt something in my chest that I have not got a good word for. Not rage. I have been in enough rooms with liars to know rage, and this was not that. It was recognition. Because I had done exactly that thing in my own kitchen 31 hours earlier. I had a wife upstairs and a photograph on the table, and I had said to myself, you don't walk into an interview without your file in order. That is a professional standard. It is in a manual, it is true. And it let me not go up the stairs. Sai taught me the trade. He taught me all of it. Did he pay you? I said. Sai looked at me and did not take offense, which is how I knew the answer before he gave it. No, he said. That's the thing I need you to understand. And I know you won't. Nobody paid anybody. There was no envelope. Marchetti never called me, never called you, never called the district manager. He didn't have to. He just owned the lot next door and waited, and an insurance company in Connecticut did the rest of it for him for free. He got up out of the chair. It took him a second, and he put a hand on the rail. There's one more thing, he said. You're not going to like it either. There's more. There's a box. He went in through the screen door. I heard him going down a hallway and a closet door, and a long silence, and then him coming back with something heavy enough that he was breathing through it. He set it on the porch table. Cardboard file box, lid on. On the side in grease pencil, inside Dunmore's block capitals, Ellery working. Field notes, he said. The canvas sheets that never made the final. Both dispatch tapes, the county's and ours. Everything I pulled out of that file before it went to storage, so the file would be clean. I put my hand flat on the lid. How long have you had this? 27 years. Why keep it? Sai sat back down and looked out at his pine trees and took a long time answering. And when he did, his voice had gone somewhere I had never heard it go in 31 years, because I always figured somebody would come out here and ask, he said. I just thought it'd be a lawyer. I never once thought it'd be you. I did not open Sai's box that night. I want that on the record too. I drove back from Yemisi with it on the passenger seat where a man put something he is afraid of, and I carried it into the house and set it on the kitchen table. And then I stood there and looked at it and did not cut the tape. Instead, I got back in the truck and drove to Ellery Street. It was 4 p.m. Rosalind's car was not in the driveway and had not been since Thursday morning, and I had stopped pretending to myself that I did not know what that meant. Ellery Street runs 6 blocks east off Rybot and dead ends at the Marsh. In 1998, it had the freight yard at the top, the warehouse in the middle, a shell station, and a cinder block building where a man named Dupree fixed outboard motors. All of that is gone. The freight yard went in 2004, Dupree died. The shell station is a vacant slab with grass coming up through where the pumps were, and the middle of the block where the warehouse stood is 40 yards of graded dirt behind 8 feet of chain link with green privacy slats woven through it. There was a sign wired to the gate, Marchetti Development Group. Ellery Point Phase 1. Coming 2026. Under it, smaller rendering. 4 buildings, glass balconies, a boardwalk out over the marsh, and little watercolor people walking little watercolor dogs. I sat in the truck across the street for a while. There was nobody on that block. There is never anybody on that block. Then I got out and walked to the corner of the fence where it turns to run down toward the water. Because a chain-link fence is only as good as its corner post, and this one had settled about 4 inches out of plumb in the sand. I want to say something here about what I did next because I have thought about how it looks. I am 57 years old. 18 months ago, I had a heart attack in the parking lot of a buy low and spent 4 days at Beaufort Memorial with a stent going into my chest and my daughter asleep in a vinyl chair. My cardiologist has told me twice in writing that I am to avoid isometric strain. I got a foot in the diamond of that chain link at the corner post, and I went over the top of an 8-foot fence. It took me a minute and a half, and I was not graceful, and I put my knee down hard on the other side, and I lay there in the dirt for about 30 seconds with my heart going in a way I have been taught to be afraid of. And I thought, if this is it, they are going to find Walter Brennan dead in a construction lot at 57 years old, and nobody will ever know why he was in here. Then it's settled, And I got up, and I started walking the scene. Here is what a burned building leaves behind after 27 years and a bulldozer. Nothing. It leaves you nothing. That is what I need people to understand. There is no ash, there is no foundation because they broke it up and hauled it. There is graded fill dirt, and there is the shape of the lot, and there is where the sun goes down. But I did not need the building. I have the building. 340 pages of it, 60 photographs of it, 11 weeks of my own handwriting about it. And I have been carrying all of it in my head since Friday morning, like a man carrying a full glass across a room. What I needed was north. I stood roughly where the northeast corner had been. I pasted off the fence line, which had not moved because fence lines never do, and I turned and faced the way I had faced in 1998, with a camera in my hand. And I stood there and let the afternoon do the rest of it. The wind on that block comes off the marsh. It comes from the southeast, and it comes steady because the water is a quarter mile that way, and there is nothing between here and there but Spartina grass. I could feel it on the left side of my face. In September it would have been stronger, and it would have been warmer, and it would have been carrying moisture, and at 4 o'clock in the morning it would have been running that way exactly as it was running now, because that is not weather. That is geography. My report says the fire originated in the northeast quadrant, in a service panel, and moved southwest through stored dry goods. Southwest. Into the wind. Now fire does that. I need to be careful here because I have spent 31 years correcting people who think fire cannot go against a prevailing wind, and it can, and it does. But it does not do it evenly. When a fire runs against ventilation, it stalls and it surges and it leaves you a mess, inconsistent char depth alligatoring that changes character in the same 6 feet, burn indicators that flat contradict each other on opposite sides of the same post. I had all of that in 1998. Every bit of it. It is in the file. I photographed it and I measured it and I put the numbers in a table. And then on page 11 I wrote, "Though pattern development is atypical," and I moved on. Atypical. I stood in the middle of 40 yards of graded dirt, with the wind coming off the marsh on the left side of my face, and I understood the thing I had been walking around for 2 days. There is no version of that fire that starts in a service panel in the northeast corner. The pattern I documented is not the pattern of a fire that started in one place. It is the pattern of a fire that started in more than one place, which is a thing that does not happen by accident, and which every man who has ever done this work for more than a year knows the instant he sees it. I did not lack the training in 1998. I had the training. I had 4 years under Cy Dunmore, and I could read a burn pattern better at 29 than most men can at 50. I knew, not suspected, not wondered. Not flagged for follow-up pending resource allocation. I knew on about the 4th day standing in wet ash in that building with a flashlight that somebody had set that fire. And then I spent 11 weeks writing 340 pages of true sentences that carefully never said so. And I handed it to a man who I now know had already decided what it was going to say. And I went home and slept. I want to tell you what I did in that lot after I understood that. I did not weep. I am not built for it, and I had not for 18 months, not at the hospital, and not when Elna died, and not on Thursday night in my kitchen. I got out my phone, and I photographed the fence line, and the grade, and the marsh, and the direction of the wind on the grass. 4 frames the way you shoot a scene, and I put the phone back in my pocket. Then I said his name out loud in an empty lot. Esteban Alonso Reyes. It came out wrong. I had been typing it and reading it for 2 days, and I had never once said it, and I got the stress in the wrong place on the middle name, and I stood there and said it again slower until I had it. 41 years old. Night security. A daughter who was 7. The light was going. I walked back to the corner post and got over the fence again, which was worse coming out than going in. And I sat in my truck on Ellery Street with my hands on the wheel until the shaking in my arms quit. There was a girl who was 7 years old in 1998. She would be 34 now. And it occurred to me sitting there that in 11 weeks of investigation and 27 years of not thinking about it, I had never once met her. It took me 2 days to find her, which is embarrassing because it should have taken 20 minutes. The delay was not the search. The delay was me sitting in my truck outside the county library with her employer's address written on the back of an envelope, working out what a man says. Odalis Reyes manages the overnight desk at a hotel on the water in Port Royal. 11 at night to 7 in the morning, 5 days a week. She has done it for 9 years. I got there at 6:40 on a Wednesday morning and waited in the lot. She came out at 7:10 with a jacket over her uniform and a canvas bag on her shoulder, and she was almost to her car before I got my door open and I said her name across the parking lot in the gray light like a man calling to a stranger, which is what I was. She turned around. I have interviewed, at a rough count, somewhere over 900 people. Claimants, witnesses, adjusters, arson suspects, widows. I have a method I trust. Every part of that method left me in that parking lot. Ma'am, my name is Walter Brennan. I was the investigator on the fire that killed your father. She stood there with her keys in her hand. I know who you are, she said. That is not what I expected. I expected to have to explain myself. I had 3 or 4 sentences ready for that, and they went out of my head and have never come back. I've read your name once a year for 27 years, she said. Every September, I take the file out and I read it and I put it back. Your signature is on page 1 and page 340. Walter J. Brennan, license 4471. The wind off the water was coming across the lot, and she did not seem to feel it. You have a copy of the report. My mother requested it in 2001. It cost $42. She shifted the bag on her shoulder. Do you want coffee? I've been up all night, and if I stand here much longer, I'm going to fall over. There is a diner 2 blocks from that hotel that opens at 6. We sat in a booth by the window. She ordered eggs and did not eat them. You should say what you came to say, she said. I've got to sleep. So I said it. I told her the fire did not start in a service panel. I told her the burn pattern in my own photographs was consistent with more than one point of origin, and that I had documented every bit of it and then written a report that did not say so. I told her about the car on the shoulder in photograph 11 and the plate on the back of it and the name on the parcel record for the lot immediately east. I did not tell her about my wife. There was a version of that conversation where I explained how I came to be looking at all this again after 27 years, and I understood, sitting in that booth, that the version was for me and not for her, and I kept it in my mouth. She listened to all of it without moving. When I finished, she said, Did you know in 1998, I had rehearsed a great many things on the drive over. That question was not one of them, and there was only one answer to it. Yes. Odalis Reyes nodded slowly, and she looked out the window at the parking lot. And then she did something I was not ready for. She said, Okay. Not how could you. Not you son of a bitch. Not anything a man could stand up under. Just okay, the way you say it when a doctor confirms a thing you have privately known about your own body for a year. I thought it was money, she said. That's what I always thought. I thought somebody paid you. Nobody paid me. That's worse. Yes, ma'am. It is. She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, and I thought about my son, doing the same thing in my kitchen 5 days earlier. And I wondered whether everybody does that, or whether I have simply spent my life watching people's hands. My mother went back to Hardyville, she said. She's still there. She's 71 and she cleans 2 houses a week because she cannot sit still. When the check came from the insurance company, she gave half of it to the church and put the rest away for my school. And she has never once said a bad word about anybody involved in this. Odalis looked up. She said it was God's business and not ours. That is what she has said to me for 27 years. And you? I've never believed that for a single day of my life. She said it flatly, the way you state your own height. My father did not smoke. Everybody who worked that yard knew he did not smoke, and the report says the origin was electrical, so that part never mattered anyway. But here is what mattered. She reached into the canvas bag beside her on the vinyl seat. She put a watch on the table between us. It was a man's watch, steel, the crystal scratched and gone yellow at the edges, on a cheap expansion band that had been sized down and never sized back. The hands were stopped at 340. "They gave me that in a bag at the hospital," she said, "along with his wallet and a set of keys and $11. I was 7. My mother put the bag in a closet and I took the watch out of it when I was about 15. I looked at that watch on the Formica for a long moment before I let myself understand what she was showing me. "The county call log," I said. "Says the first report of fire came in at 4:11 in the morning." She had it memorized. Of course she had it memorized. "Your report uses that time. It's in there 8 times. Every timeline in that document starts at 4:11. And this stopped at 3:40, 31 minutes earlier." Odalis put one finger on the crystal and turned the watch a little, the way you would move a chess piece. "I asked a jeweler in Bluffton about it when I was 19. He said heat will stop a watch like that, or water will, or a hard knock, and there's no way to know which. He said it wasn't proof of anything." "It isn't. I know it isn't." Her jaw set. "But I've been sitting with a thing that isn't proof of anything for 27 years, Mr. Brennan, and I've never once had anybody in a position to do something about it sit across a table from me. So I want to ask you a question, and I want a straight answer because I have not had one of those either." "Ask it." "If the fire started at 3:40, she said, "where does 31 minutes go?" I sat in that booth and felt the whole thing turn over the way a case does, not with noise, with a settling. A fire in a commercial structure with that fuel load does not burn undetected for 31 minutes on a block with a state highway 200 yards west of it. Somebody sees it. Somebody smells it. Somebody calls, unless somebody who saw it did not call, or called somewhere else first. "I don't know," I said. "But I know how to find out." And Odalis Reyes reached into the bag again and put a second thing on the table. It was a hospital property bag. Heavy plastic, the old kind, with a printed inventory block on the front, filled out in ballpoint by somebody in 1998. And it was still sealed at the top with a strip of tape gone brown. "That's the rest of it," she said. "My mother never opened it. I never opened it. I have carried this thing 3 times to 3 apartments and I have never once had a reason good enough." She pushed it across the Formica. "You're the fireman," she said, "so open it." We did not open the bag in the diner. Odalis said no when I offered, and I understood it before she finished the sentence. "Some things you do not do under fluorescent light with a waitress refilling your coffee." She took it back. She said she would call me when she was ready, and she wrote my number on a napkin in handwriting neater than mine has ever been, and she went home to sleep off a night shift with her father's watch back in her bag. I drove to the county administration building instead, because a man has to do something with his hands. The Beaufort County Land Records Office is on the 2nd floor in a room that has not been repainted since I used to come in here for parcel histories on adjacent property claims. I know the room. I know the smell of it, toner and old paper, and the particular mildew that gets into a coastal building no matter how many times they run the dehumidifiers. I also know Charlene Betts, who has worked the counter in that office for at least 20 years, because I used to bring her a box of pralines from a place on Bay Street every Christmas back when I had a reason to be in that building 4 times a month. Her husband had a stroke in 2015 and I sat with her in a hospital cafeteria for an hour while the doctors worked. And neither of us has ever mentioned that afternoon since, which is its own kind of closeness. "Walter Brennan," she said. "Lord, I thought retired." I did. "You don't look retired. You look like you're working a file." I put a name and a project on the counter between us, the way you put down a claim number. "Marchetti Development, Ellery Point. I need the parcel assembly, everything they've bought on that block going back." Something moved behind Charlene's face. It was small, and if I had not spent 31 years reading exactly that kind of small movement, I would have missed it entirely. "That's a public record," she said. "I can pull it." "I know it is. Give me a few minutes." She went into the back and I stood at the counter, and through the doorway I watched her pick up the telephone on her desk before she got to the filing cabinets. She kept her voice low and her back half turned, the way you do when you are being professional about something you would rather not be doing. and she was not on that call more than 90 seconds. I did not hear a word of it. I want to be clear about that because I am not going to pretend to knowledge I do not have. But in 31 years, I have watched a great many people make a great many phone calls in a great many back offices. And there is a particular economy to the ones that matter. Short, low over fast, and followed by the caller coming back out front, a little too bright, a little too quick with the folder. Charlene came back out with a folder and a smile that had not been there before. "Here you go, hun. Take your time." I took my time. The assembly was worse than Dean's valuation had led on. Marchetti Development Group LLC, a Delaware entity registered to a P.O. box in Bluffton, had been quietly acquiring parcels on Ellery Street for 6 years. Not all at once. 2 lots in 2019, 1 in 2021, 3 more in 2023. All bought within 4 months of each other, from owners who had held the ground since before I was investigating fires at all. Every deed used the same closing attorney out of Hilton Head, and every price ran high enough over assessed value that a man who has spent 31 years reading numbers for a living does not need a second look to know what he is seeing. 34 acres, nearly the entire block water to road with one exception. I found it on the 3rd page, a plat map with the parcels shaded and numbered. And I did not need to look up the address to know which one it was because I have paid the property tax on it for 27 years. Lot 12. Unshaded. White in the middle of 34 acres of gray. My house. I sat with that map for a long time in a county building that smelled like toner, and I understood something that had been sitting half-formed in me since Dean put that valuation on my kitchen table. Marchetti did not need my house because it was worth anything close to what he was offering. He needed it because it was the one piece of that block he did not own. And a man does not build 4 buildings and a boardwalk around a single hole in the plat, where a retired insurance investigator lives with a stack of photographs from 1998. I was not incidental to this. I had never been incidental to this. I had spent 5 days thinking I was the man who happened to notice something, and sitting in that office with a plat map in my hands, I understood I was the last obstacle on a piece of paper, and had been for years before I ever saw my wife get into that car. "Find what you needed?" Charlene asked when I brought the folder back. "I did. Thank you." "You take care now, Walter." Her eyes did not quite meet mine, and I let her have that because she has 3 grandchildren and a county pension 11 years from vesting, and I am not in the business of costing a woman her retirement over a phone call I cannot even prove I heard. I got back in the truck and sat in the county lot for a minute before I started the engine. Here is what I understood sitting there, that I had not let myself understand in the diner or on Ellery Street or anywhere else in 5 days of looking. I was not conducting a quiet investigation. I had believed, without ever quite saying it to myself, that I still had the advantage a good investigator always wants, that the subject does not know he is being looked at. I had believed it because it is the natural way to believe the way I was trained to believe, the way I taught for 11 years in a classroom in Columbia. You proceed as though you are invisible until the moment you are ready not to be, and the whole architecture of the work depends on nobody upstream knowing you are coming. That belief had just made a phone call to somebody from a back office in under 2 minutes in front of me, while I stood at a counter, reading a wanted poster for Christmas pralines. I thought about Dean 7 days ago, sliding a valuation across my kitchen table before I had even finished my coffee. I thought about a bar dinner, where a man I had never met somehow already knew I still had boxes in my garage. I thought about how very fast and how very calmly information about an old man's quiet mornings seemed to travel in this county. Whatever room I was walking around in, the clock in it had already been running for longer than I knew. The papers came on a Tuesday by process server while I was standing in the yard with a hose in my hand, doing nothing in particular to a hedge that did not need it. He was a young man in a golf shirt who did not want to be there. And I have some sympathy for that line of work because I have served a subpoena or two myself, and there is no way to make it a pleasant errand for either party. "Walter Brennan, that's me. You've been served." He held the envelope out like it might be hot. I took it, and he said, "Sorry." which nobody had trained him to say, and which he said anyway. And he got back in his car and sat there a moment, writing something on a clipboard, before he pulled out of the drive. I stood there with the envelope and the hose still running at my feet, and I watched his taillights go down Marsh Hen Road toward the highway, and I thought absurdly that I hoped he had somewhere better to be for the rest of his afternoon than handing men papers like that one. I did not open it in the yard. I turned off the hose and coiled it the way you were supposed to, over the elbow and not the wrist, and I went inside and sat at the kitchen table, the same chair where I had laid out 60 photographs 8 days before, and I opened it there. Rosalind had not been home in 5 days. I want to note that plainly because I had not until that envelope let myself think about what her absence actually meant. I had been telling myself she was staying with her sister, which was not possible because her sister has been dead since March, and I had known that, and let the lie sit in the house anyway because a lie you have already caught does less damage than one you are still catching. The petition was for divorce, irreconcilable differences, equitable division of marital property, including the residence at 214 Marsh Hen Road. I read it twice. The second time I read it the way I read a report, not for what it said, but for the dates. Petitions like this get built over weeks. There is a retainer and an intake meeting and drafts that go back and forth between a client and an attorney, and every one of those steps leaves a date on it somewhere, because lawyers bill in 15-minute increments, and every increment gets a timestamp. I have subpoenaed enough attorney billing records in fraud cases to know that better than most men who are not lawyers themselves. I found the engagement letter attached as an exhibit referenced for the fee arrangement. Rosalind had signed a retainer with a firm in Hilton Head 4 months ago. I sat with that number for a long time. And then I got a legal pad from the drawer by the phone, the same drawer where we have kept a legal pad since before either of my children could write their own names. And I built a timeline, the way I have built 100 timelines, in 2 columns, dates on the left and events on the right. 4 months ago was June. Rosalind started at the real estate office on Bay Street in July. She met Marchetti, by her own account told to me over a dinner I no longer entirely believed, told to me at a moment when I had no reason yet to disbelieve it. At an open house in early August, when his firm toured a listing his company had an interest in. She hired a divorce attorney 6 weeks before she met the man I had spent a week assuming was the reason she wanted one. I sat at my kitchen table and felt the whole shape of the last 8 days turn over in my hands, like a plank I had been reading from the wrong side. I had built a story. I want to say that plainly, because building the wrong story is a thing I have watched other investigators do, and have corrected in trainees, and have apparently done to myself without noticing. The story was, my wife of 29 years fell into an affair, and a predatory man used that affair to get at my house, and my son, weak and easily flattered, got pulled along behind both of them. That story has a wife who strayed, and a man who exploited it. The dates did not support that story. The dates supported something with the order reversed. Somebody had decided by June that this marriage needed to end, and this house needed to change hands. And only after that decision was already sitting in a lawyer's file in Hilton Head did an affair with a wealthy, unattached man become part of the picture. I do not know, sitting here telling you this, whether Rosalind went looking for Gil Marchetti, or whether he was put in her path the way Dean had clearly been managed, softened, handled. I did not know it then either. I still do not have all of it, and I am not going to pretend to you that I worked it out whole at that kitchen table, because I did not. What I understood with the petition flat on the table in front of me, and my hose still coiled wrong in the yard because I had not done it right after all, was smaller than that, and worse. I had spent 8 days investigating a case of infidelity. That was not the case. I have taught a version of this in a classroom in Columbia, in a slide with a photograph of a burned kitchen on it, and the line under the photograph reads, "Do not let the first fact you find decide which fire you are investigating." I have said that sentence to 200 people over 11 years, in a room with bad coffee and worse chairs, and every one of them nodded like it was obvious. I sat at my own kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon and understood that I had done the exact thing I warn rooms full of adjusters never to do. I found a car in a parking lot and I built a case about a marriage when the actual fire had started somewhere I had not thought to look at all, in a lawyer's office in Hilton Head, 4 months before I ever picked up that phone in the parking lot of the Port Royal Grill. The petition listed the residence at 214 Marsh Hen Road as marital property, subject to equitable division. I looked at that line for a long time, and then I looked out the kitchen window at the marsh gold going toward evening the way it has looked every October for 27 years. Somebody wanted that view badly enough to end a marriage to get a clean line to it. I had assumed, since Thursday night in that parking lot, that I understood exactly what kind of fire this was. A man's wife, a man's son. Betrayal, the ordinary kind, the kind with a bed in it. I did not know what kind of fire this was. I had never once, in 11 weeks in 1998, or 8 days in the present, gotten to ask the only question that has ever mattered in my line of work. Who benefits? I sat at that table until the light went out of the marsh. And then I picked up the petition, and I read the attorney's name at the bottom of it, and I understood that my next stop was not going to be a lawyer. It was going to be my daughter. Marisol works 12-hour shifts in the emergency department at Beaufort Memorial, and she has a rule about her father showing up unannounced, which is that I do not, and I broke it that Wednesday night. She opened the door in scrubs, with her hair still up, and a granola bar in her hand that was clearly meant to be dinner, and she looked at my face for about 1 second before she stepped back to let me in. "Who died?" she said. It is a nurse's joke. It has never once been funny to me, and I have never once told her that. "Nobody. I need to talk to you." "You look like somebody died, Dad." I sat down at her kitchen table, which is smaller than the one at home, and has a chip in the formica shaped like Florida. And I told her most of it. The photograph, the car, Cy, Ellery Street and the fence, and what the wind had told me. O'Dallas and the watch stopped at 3:40. The petition and the 4 months and the plat map with my own house sitting white in a gray field. She listened the way she listens to a patient giving a history, not interrupting, not reacting, filing it. When I finished, she did not say anything for a while. She got up and put water on for tea she did not end up making, and she stood at the counter with her back to me. And I understood I was about to hear the thing I had actually driven over there to hear, and that some part of me had known it since I got in the truck. "Okay," she said. "I'm going to say something and I need you to let me finish it before you talk." "All right. You've been telling me this story for 20 minutes like it's about what Mom did, what Dean did, what this Marchetti person did to you." She turned around, and I sat here and I listened to the whole thing, and I kept waiting for the part where you talk about what you did. And it never came. "Marisol, you said let me finish." I let her finish. "You had a photograph in a box in the garage for 27 years, Dad. You knew there was a car in it. You've told me that yourself, just now. Sitting at this table, you didn't miss it. You found it in 1998 and Cy told you to bury it, and you did. That's not a mystery you solved this week. That's a confession you're finally getting around to. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm not talking about forgiving it." Her voice did not rise. Marisol has never once raised her voice at me in her life, and it is somehow always worse than if she did. "I'm talking about the fact that you drove over here tonight to tell me a story about a fire that happened in 1998 and a marriage that's falling apart this month, and you are telling both of those stories like you are the man standing outside them with a flashlight. Like you're the investigator. You keep doing that. You've done it my whole life." I did not say anything. "You were gone for 11 weeks that fall," she said. "Overtime on the case. I was 3 months old. Mom used to tell me that like it was a nice story. Your father worked so hard. He cared so much about doing it right. And now you're telling me the reason you were gone is you were building a report you already knew was wrong. That's not... You've been gone a lot of falls, Dad." She said it quietly. "You've investigated a lot of other people's houses. You are very, very good at knowing exactly what happened in somebody else's kitchen. And you have been married to Mom for 29 years in a house you apparently never once really looked at." I sat at that small table with the Florida-shaped chip in the formica, and I felt something in my chest that was not the heart thing, though for a second I checked out of old habit. "You think I did this?" I said. "To us?" "I think you didn't do anything. That's what I think. Marisol sat back down across from me. I think you have spent your whole career being the man who finds out what happened after it's too late to stop it, and I think somewhere along the way, that turned into a way of living in your own house, too. You didn't set fire to your marriage, Dad. But you've been standing in a room that smelled like smoke for a long time, telling yourself it was somebody burning leaves next door. It was nearly word for word the thing I had said to myself in that kitchen 8 nights before about the wall that had been smoldering for 27 years. I had not told her that part. She had arrived at it on her own, sitting across a table from me in her scrubs at 9:30 at night, because she is my daughter, and because she has spent her adult life reading people who are trying not to tell her how badly they are hurt. You're right, I said. She had not expected that. I could see it cross her face. I've been doing that my whole life, I said. Not just this month. I don't have a good excuse for it. I had one once. I told myself it was patience, that a man who reads a scene too fast gets it wrong, that you wait, you gather, you don't move until you're sure. And somewhere in 29 years that turned into never moving at all. Marisol did not say anything for a moment. Then, so what are you going to do about it? I'm going to finish what I started. Not the marriage, the other thing. Ellery Street. Because it's easier than the marriage. Because a man died, I said. And I let it sit for 27 years, and there is exactly one version of me that gets to say he's a decent man at the end of this, and it is not the version that walks away now because it's uncomfortable. She studied me for a long moment, the way she studies a chart before she signs off on it. And after, she said, when Ellery Street is done, are you going to keep standing outside the rest of it with a flashlight, or are you going to actually be in your own life for once? I did not have an answer for that. I still am not entirely sure I have one, telling you this now. I don't know, I said, which was the most honest thing I had said to anyone in 8 days. She nodded slowly, like that at least she could work with. Cy called the house phone an hour ago, she said. He didn't have your cell. He said to tell you he listened to the tapes himself before you got there, and you need to sit down before you play the second one. What tapes? He didn't say. He just said the second one. She looked at me. Dad, go. I'll be fine. Go find out what's on the second one. I stood up from that small table, and I put my hand on my daughter's shoulder for a moment. Which is not a thing we do, not in this family, and she let me. Then I drove 40 minutes to Yemassee in the dark, with Cy's box still sitting exactly where I had left it. And I understood, somewhere around the county line, that I had never actually opened it. I had been carrying it around like Odalis's bag. Sealed, present, untouched. Cy was on the porch when I pulled in. No dogs this time, just him and a small cassette player sitting on the rail with a cord running back through the screen door to an outlet inside. You look like Marisol got hold of you, he said. She did. Good. He picked up the player. Sit down, Walt. I want you to hear this before I say another word about it. He pressed play, and the porch filled with 27-year-old static, and then a dispatcher's voice, reading back a time 3:52 a.m., and then a second voice, young male, badly out of breath, saying the address on Ellery Street. And then right at the end before the line cut, 4 words I did not understand yet, and would not stop hearing for the rest of my life. Tell him I didn't. The tape cut there. Cy reached over and stopped it with his thumb. There's more, he said. But I want you to sit with that first part a minute, because once I play you the rest, you're not going to be the same kind of tired you are right now. You're going to be a different kind. He called me himself. That surprised me more than almost anything else in this story. I was in the kitchen when the phone rang, a number I did not have saved. And I almost let it go, and then some part of me that has answered 900 interviews picked it up out of habit. Walter. Gil Marchetti. His voice had the particular warmth of a man who has never once doubted he would be welcome. I think it's past time we sat down. Man to man, no lawyers, no sons in the middle of it. You free tomorrow evening? I sat with the phone against my ear and thought about Cy's porch and the cassette player and 4 words I had been carrying around for 2 days that I still did not have the rest of. I'm free, I said. Good. There's a place on Bay Street. Halifax, 7 o'clock. My treat, obviously. A small laugh easy, the kind that assumes you will laugh along. I know how that sounds. Come anyway. I went. Halifax is the kind of restaurant that has existed in one form or another on that street for 40 years. Wood floors and a view of the water, and a maitre d' who has known me by name since before he had gray in his beard. And he looked surprised to seat me at a table already occupied by Gil Marchetti. Marchetti stood when I came over. A big man, taller than me, silver going white at the temples, dressed the way men dress when they have stopped needing to prove anything with their clothes. He put out his hand. I shook it because there are situations where not shaking a man's hand tells him more about your position than shaking it does. And I did not want him to know my position yet. Sit, sit. I ordered you a bourbon. I hope that's still your drink. It was still my drink. I did not ask how he knew that. We talked for the first 15 minutes about nothing. The weather, a hurricane that had missed us the year before, his development background, told in the modest, self-deprecating way successful men tell it all luck and hard work, and never once the word money. He asked about my heart gently, and I told him it was fine, and he said he was glad and meant it or performed meaning it so well I could not find the seam. I have interviewed men like this before. Not many. Most of the men I have sat across a table from in this work are frightened or angry or exhausted because most people who end up across a table from an investigator have something to lose and know it. Gil Marchetti did not have that. He had the particular calm of a man who has never once in his whole life believed the consequences would land on him. I want to make you an offer, he said once the plates came. Not about the house. Forget the house for a minute. I want to talk about you. Go on. You're a careful man, Walter. Meticulous. I've done my homework. 416 fires, not one. Finding overturned in 31 years. That's a serious mind. He cut into his fish. I have 3 current litigations where a man with your background would be worth more in a year than you made in your last 5 at that insurance company. I mean that as a genuine compliment, not a bribe. I'm retired. Retired men get bored. He smiled. I get the sense you're not sleeping well lately anyway. Might as well not sleep well doing something interesting. I want to explain something about the next several minutes because it is the part of that dinner I have gone back over more than any other trying to understand exactly how he did what he did. He never once mentioned Rosalind. He never once mentioned Dean. He never mentioned the divorce or the valuation or Ellery Point. For 40 minutes, he built a version of the evening that was only about me, my career, my competence, my future. And he built it with real skill. The way a good closer builds a deal, letting the other man feel the size of his own value before he ever asks for anything. I let him do it. I want that understood. I sat there and drank a bourbon I had not asked for and let a man I now believed had set a fire that killed someone tell me how impressive I was because some part of my training understood that the longer he talked, the more of himself he would eventually leave lying on the table. It came, as it turned out, near the very end almost as an afterthought, the way the most important sentence in an interview always does. Anyway, he set down his fork. Think about it. No rush. You've got time to weigh it out, I imagine. You do most of your best thinking out in that garage of yours, don't you, Rosalind? Mentioned you never throw anything away. Said you've still got boxes out there from your very first year on the job. He said it lightly. He said it the way you mention the weather or a mutual friend's new dog, a small, warm detail meant to show he had been paying attention, had been listening to my wife talk about me. The way a man listens to someone he cares about. I kept my face still. I have had a great deal of practice keeping my face still, and I used every year of it in that moment, because what had just happened at that table was not a compliment. My wife had told this man about my garage, not the fact of a garage, every house has one. She had told him specifically that I kept old files, that I never threw anything away, that whatever a man like me might have squirreled away from the beginning of his career was sitting out there untouched, waiting. She had not known in July what was in that box. I do not believe that. I have turned it every way I can, and I do not believe my wife knew there was a photograph of Gil Marchetti's car sitting 14 feet from the lawnmower. But she had told him where to look months before either of us had a reason to think it mattered. She had handed him a floor plan of her own husband's habits, the way you hand over something small and harmless at a dinner party. A detail, an anecdote, a fond complaint about the man you married. He never throws anything away, and he had filed it. Because that is what men like Gil Marchetti do with every small, true thing anyone ever tells them about anyone else. She's right, I said. I don't throw much away. Good trait in a man your age. He smiled again and signaled for the check, and the whole thing closed as smoothly as it had opened. Two men who had shared a pleasant meal and a serious conversation about serious things. He shook my hand again at the door. His grip was warm and dry and entirely confident, and he told me to think about the offer. And he said it was good to finally sit down together man to man, and he meant that part too, in whatever way a man like him means anything. I stood on Bay Street in the dark after his car pulled away, and understood something that took the wind out of me worse than the fence at Ellery Street had, worse than the tape cutting off on Cy's porch. I had spent 8 days thinking of my wife as a woman standing next to a man who was using her. That was still probably true, but it was not the whole of it. And standing there on that sidewalk, I had to make room for a harder thought, one I did not want and could not put back. That somewhere in the last 5 months, without ever once deciding to betray me on purpose, Rosalind had become the easiest door into my own house that Gil Marchetti had. Not the woman he loved, the woman he had asked the right small questions. I did not sleep well that night, which is not the same as saying I lay awake thinking about Rosalind, though I did some of that too. Mostly I lay there running the dinner back the way I run a scene frame by frame, listening for the thing under the thing. By the time I gave up on sleeping, it was near 5. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching the marsh come up gray and then gold, and around 6:30 I went out to check on Cy's box because I had left it on the workbench, and some old habit would not let me leave evidence sitting out overnight without confirming it was where I left it. The garage door was open 4 inches. I want to be precise about the distance because precision has become the only thing I trust myself to be exact about. And 4 inches is not a door somebody forgot. My garage door runs on a spring-loaded track, and it does one of two things: it is down-sealed, or it is up all the way on the automatic opener. It does not sit 4 inches open on its own. Somebody had pulled it up by hand just far enough to slide under and let it back down without engaging the latch. I stood in the driveway for a moment. Then I went in through the kitchen instead, quietly, and picked up the flashlight I keep in the drawer by the back door, and went into the garage the long way through the interior door. The way you clear a structure, instead of walking straight into whatever might still be inside it. Nobody was there. I want that said plainly because for about 90 seconds I believed somebody might be, and I have not felt that particular kind of alertness in my own house since before I retired, and I did not like having it back. It is a different kind of attention than the kind you use to read a fire scene. That one is patient. This one wants to know immediately which direction to run. The workbench was empty. Cy's box Ellery, working in his grease pencil block capitals, was gone. My own 340-page file, the one I had carried down off the shelf 8 days before, was also gone, box and all, along with the loop I keep in my field bag and had left sitting on top of it. They had left the Christmas lights. They had left the coffee can of drill bits. They had taken exactly the 2 boxes on that bench that mattered and nothing else, which told me more than an empty garage should. I stood there for a while, with the flashlight still on in my hand, in full daylight, feeling my heart do the thing Dr. Achebe has told me twice in writing to avoid provoking. And I made myself sit down on the shop stool until it settled, the way I had made myself sit in that empty lot on Ellery Street 2 weeks before. Then I called Cy. "Somebody's been in my garage," I said. "Both boxes are gone. Mine and yours." There was a silence on the line that went on a beat too long. "Not mine," Cy said finally. "I made a copy before I ever brought it to your porch, Walt. I told you that. I've done this work too long to hand a man the only copy of anything." "Then where's the copy?" "In a safe deposit box in Yemisi that nobody on God's earth knows about but me and now you." His voice had gone flat and careful. the voice I remembered him using on scenes when something had just gotten serious. Whoever got into your garage got your file. The original, not mine. I sat with that for a moment. Sigh. Only 3 people have ever known which shelf that box sat on. Me, you, and say it. Dean helped me build that shelving unit in 2019. He knows this garage better than his own apartment. He's been out here 100 times. Neither of us said anything for a while. I'm not accusing him, I said, and heard how thin that sounded even as I said it. You don't have to accuse him, Walt. You just have to notice that whoever did this didn't tear the place apart looking. They walked in, they went straight to the one shelf on the left side of a 2-car garage, past a bin of Christmas lights. That would have hidden a smaller box a lot better. And they took exactly the right 2 things and left everything else standing square. That's not a burglar. That's somebody who already knew where to look. I thought about Marchetti at dinner. The ease of your garage, the specific warmth of a man repeating something he had been told by someone who loved me enough to mention it without ever meaning harm by it. Rosalind had told him about the boxes. She had not told him which shelf. There is only one person alive who has been in that garage often enough, casually enough, over enough years to know exactly which 4 square feet of shelving held what, without ever once being told, without ever once needing to ask. I have to go, I told Cy. Walt. His voice stopped me before I could hang up. Whoever this was, they were in your house. Your actual house while you were in it or about to be. That is not a paperwork problem anymore. You understand that. I understand it. Then act like a man whose heart already tried to kill him once. Lock the door behind you when you go back in. I mean that. I sat in my garage a while longer, after I hung up with the empty stretch of workbench in front of me, where 2 boxes had been that morning. And I thought about Dean at 7 in the morning, 11 days before, sliding a valuation across my kitchen table, telling me gently that I should think about his mother. I thought about him standing on a curb with his hand on a car door, smiling at a man taking his mother to dinner. I had raised that boy from 4 years old. I had sat up with him through fevers and a missing rabbit ear, and every disappointment a small town hands a fatherless child before somebody steps in. I taught him to drive in the church parking lot on Sunday afternoons, and I never once in 27 years told him he owed me anything for any of it, because I did not believe he did. And somewhere in the last 2 weeks I had gone from wondering why he never once called me Dad, to wondering whether he had, at some point I could not locate. Quietly stopped being on my side of anything at all. I locked the garage. I locked the kitchen door behind me the way Cy told me to for the first time in the 27 years I have lived in that house. Then I sat at my kitchen table and thought about the 4 words on Cy's tape that I still had not heard the rest of because the tape that could finish that sentence had just walked out of my garage in a box with somebody else's hands on it. I was going to have to go back to Yemisi and start again from the copy. And I was going to have to find out, before I did anything else, exactly how much my son already knew. I did not call Dean. I want to explain why, because it was not mercy and it was not fear either, though I have thought about both. It was that I have spent 31 years learning the exact cost of asking a question before you have the answer to check it against. A man who already suspects the truth and asks anyway, without proof in hand, gives the other person time to build a story around the gap. I was not ready to hand my son that kind of time. Not yet, not until I had heard the rest of what was on that tape. I drove to Yemisi instead first thing the next morning, and Cy was waiting on the porch with the safe deposit envelope already sitting on the rail, like he had known I would not sleep either. "You eat anything?" he said. "No." "Eat something first. What's on this tape isn't going anywhere it hasn't already been for 27 years. I did not eat anything. He knew I would not and made me a plate of eggs anyway. And I ate about half of it out of respect for the effort. And then he set the cassette player on the porch rail between us and pressed rewind until the counter read 0. "Before I play it," he said, "I want you to understand what you're about to hear so it doesn't knock you flat. There's 2 calls on this tape. The first one's the dispatcher's copy, the one that made it into the official record 4:11 a.m. That's the timeline everybody's worked off for 27 years. The second call is 19 minutes earlier. It never made it into any file. I pulled the reel myself out of the archive room before it got sent for destruction in 2003, because something about it never sat right with me. And I never told a living soul I had it. Not even your father-in-law, God rest him. And he and I told each other everything. 19 minutes. 19 minutes. Cy pressed play. Static, the particular hiss of a cassette copied from a reel, copied from a dispatch line, and then a woman's voice, calm, professional, the way dispatchers train themselves to sound, no matter what is coming through the receiver. County emergency, what is your emergency? And then a young man's voice, breathing hard, the words tumbling over each other, the way they do when a person is somewhere between panic and shock. There's a fire. There's a fire on Ellery, the warehouse. It's bad. You need to send somebody, now. Sir, what is your location? Ellery Street? The old freight warehouse? It's already through the roof on one side. The dispatcher asked him to stay on the line. He did not. There was a sound like the phone being set down, not hung up. And then fainter, further from the receiver, like he had turned to say it to someone standing near him, rather than into the phone at all. Tell him I didn't know anyone was inside. Cy stopped the tape. We sat there on that porch for what felt like a long time, and was probably closer to 30 seconds. Say that again for me, I said. Slow. Cy rewound it 4 inches of tape and played the last line 3 more times, and each time it was the same. Not a plea into the phone. A message. Addressed to someone else, someone in the room, or the car, or wherever that young man was standing, someone he expected to be spoken to on his behalf. Tell him. Not tell the dispatcher. Not tell them. Tell him, singular. A specific man already known to the caller, already positioned to matter, already understood by a panicked 20-year-old to be the person whose opinion of this fire was going to determine what happened to him next. He wasn't calling it in because he was a bystander, I said. No, he said it. Or helped set it. And when it went bigger than he expected, when he realized somebody was actually inside, he panicked and called it in himself. And while he was doing it, he was already worried about what his boss was going to think. That's how I hear it too, Cy said. 27 years, and I have never once been able to unhear it any other way. Do you have a voice? I have a voice on a tape from 1998. I don't have a name, but you thought you knew it. Cy was quiet for a moment, looking out at his pines. The vape pen sitting untouched on the rail beside the player. There was a kid, he said. Day labor, worked odd jobs around that end of town, in and out of trouble, but not the serious kind. The kind of trouble a young man gets into when he doesn't have anybody steering him. Lonnie Pruitt, 20 years old in '98. I talked to him once during the canvass. Everybody on that block got talked to once during the canvass, and something about him sat wrong with me even then. And I never could put a finger on why, and there was no reason in the file to push it, because I wasn't allowed to push anything in that file by then. Is he still around? He never left. Runs equipment now. Grading, mostly. Cy looked at me. Walter, I need you to hear this part clean because it matters more than the voice does. If that boy set that fire, he did not do it for himself. A 20-year-old day laborer does not own a graded commercial lot. He does not stand to gain one thing in this world from a warehouse burning down on a block he doesn't own any part of. Somebody paid him, or scared him, or both. And there is exactly one man on this earth who benefited from that fire, and it was not Lonnie Pruitt. I sat there with the tape still in the machine and understood that I was no longer investigating a fire that Gil Marchetti happened to be standing near. I was investigating a fire Gil Marchetti had ordered. Where do I find him? I said. Pruitt, Ellery Point, the construction site. He's foreman on the grading crew for the very same ground he may have helped burn down 27 years ago. Cy said it flat, but I heard what was underneath it. The particular kind of tired that comes from carrying a thing that long and finally getting to set part of it down. Marchetti's still using him. That tells you something too, Walt. A man like that doesn't keep a man like Lonnie around out of loyalty. He keeps him because Lonnie knows where the bodies are. There was only the one body, Cy said quietly. But yes, that's exactly why. I looked out at the pine trees and the drainage ditch, and thought about a girl who had been 7 years old in a house in Hardyville, and a watch stopped at 3:40 and 31 minutes that I finally, after 27 years, had a shape for. Somebody set a fire believing the building was empty. Somebody realized, standing outside it, that it was not. And in the 19 minutes between striking the match and finally desperately dialing for help, that young man had made at least one phone call to somebody else first. Not to save a life, but to find out what he was supposed to say about it. "I need to talk to Lonnie Pruitt," I said. "I know you do." Cy handed me the tape, the actual cassette, out of the machine, and closed my hand around it with both of his. "But Walter, listen to me the way you used to when you were 25 and didn't know anything yet. A man who's kept a secret like that for 27 years, working every day on the same ground where he did it, is either going to break wide open the second somebody finally asks him the right question, themselves, or he's going to be the most dangerous man you talk to in this whole thing. Marchetti invited me himself. I want that understood because everything that happened on that stage happened because a confident man made one final ordinary mistake. The same kind of mistake he had been making without consequence for 27 years. He called it a courtesy. "Longest-standing resident of the block," he said on the phone, warm as ever. "Say a few words, nothing political, just a neighbor welcoming the future." I believe to this day that he thought he was doing something almost kind, closing a chapter, letting the old man have his moment before the bulldozers made the choice permanent for him. The ceremony was set for a Saturday morning, on a temporary stage at the foot of Ellery Street facing the water, with about 200 folding chairs and a podium with a bright rendering of the 4 glass buildings pinned to the front of it. Town council, the mayor, a reporter from the Gazette and another from the Charleston paper, investors in good suits standing at the back because there were not enough chairs. Rosalind sat in the second row. I had not expected that, and seeing her there took something out of me I had not budgeted for. Dean stood near the stage steps beside Marchetti's assistant, close enough to be seen, far enough to leave himself room. I sat in the third row with a folder on my knee. Marchetti spoke first, and spoke well. He always did, about vision and legacy and a waterfront finally living up to what it had always deserved to be. He thanked the town council, he thanked his investors. Then he thanked me by name, gesturing toward my row. "A man who has watched this block longer than anyone alive." And the crowd turned to look at me, the way a crowd looks at whatever it is told to look at, and he handed me the podium with a warmth that was, in its way, completely genuine, because he did not yet know what he had just handed me. I want to say I felt nothing walking up those 3 steps. That would not be true. My heart was doing the thing it does, and I had a hand on the rail the whole way up. And I thought absurdly of Dr. Achebe's face, if she could see me. I set the folder on the podium. "Mr. Marchetti is right," I said. "I have watched this block longer than almost anyone alive. 27 years ago I stood on this ground the morning after it burned, and I photographed what was left of a warehouse and a man." The crowd's attention shifted, the particular stillness of 200 people who came for one speech and are getting another. I opened the folder and held up the first photograph large enough for the second row to see without a screen. "This is photograph number 11 from my investigation file. Context shot Ellery Street looking east 612 in the morning September 15th, 1998. If you look at the right shoulder of the road, there is a car." I turned it slightly. "The plate on that car reads GM 1962. It is registered in 1998 and today to Gil Marchetti." I did not look at him. I want to be honest about that. I did not trust myself to. Not yet. And a man learns in this work to save his nerve for the parts that need it most. My report from 1998 calls that vehicle unidentified and not associated with response. I wrote those words myself. They were not a mistake. They were a choice, and I have spent the last 3 weeks understanding exactly how large a choice it was. There was a murmur now, the reporters both leaning forward, pens moving. I set down the photograph and picked up the small recorder Cy had given me, the same one from his porch. And I held it up so the crowd could see it was a recorder and not a phone. This is the original 911 call from that night. Not the one in the county's official log, A second one made 19 minutes earlier that never made it into any file. I pressed play. The static filled that stage the way it had filled Sai's porch. And then, the young man's voice, 20 years old and terrified. And then the 4 words that had cost me 2.5 weeks of sleep. Tell him I didn't know anyone was inside. I let it sit in the air a moment before I spoke again. The man who made that call has come forward. He will tell you under oath, if it comes to that he was paid to start a fire on this exact block by a man he was told to call afterward, a man who instructed him before any investigation had even begun to say the fire was electrical. Marchetti had not moved from his seat beside the podium. I looked at him now, finally, and I want to describe exactly what I saw because it is the part of that morning I have gone back over the most. He was not afraid. Not yet. His face had the calm of a man doing rapid arithmetic, 27 years, a single, uncorroborated call, an investigator with no badge and no subpoena power, and a lawyer already reaching for his phone in the 3rd row. He believed, correctly in that moment, that none of what I had just shown 200 people would hold up in any courtroom on its own. He was right. And that is exactly why I had not planned to end there. There is one more person, I said, who has waited 27 years to stand where I am standing. Odalis Reyes came up the side steps of that stage in a plain gray dress, and she did not carry a folder, and she did not need one. My name is Odalis Reyes, she said into a microphone that had never once been pointed at her in her life. My father was Esteban Reyes. He was 41 years old. He worked nights so I could go to school in the daytime. He died in the fire on this block, and for 27 years the official record has called it an accident. She held up nothing. She had no photograph, no tape, no plat map. She stood in front of 200 people who had come to watch a groundbreaking and simply told them, in a voice that did not shake, what 4 minutes without her father had cost her. A mother who moved away, a bag of belongings never opened until 3 weeks ago, a watch stopped forever at 3:40 that she had carried in her pocket that morning and now held up so the cameras could see it. There is a kind of silence that a crowd makes when it stops performing politeness and starts actually listening. That stage got that silence. I have heard it in courtrooms twice in 31 years, and I heard it there a 3rd time on a folding chair lawn beside the marsh. Gil Marchetti stood up. He did not run, and he did not shout. And I want that understood because it was somehow worse than either. He buttoned his jacket the way a man does when he has decided to leave a room on his own terms, and he looked at Odalis for a long moment, not with fear, and not quite with cruelty either, but with the flat, assessing look of a man recalculating a problem he had believed permanently solved. That's a very moving story, he said into a live microphone to 200 witnesses and 2 reporters. I'm sorry for your loss. I had nothing to do with it. Then he sat back down, crossed one leg over the other, and reached for the water glass in front of him. And I understood, watching him do it, that Sai had been right about one thing above all others. 27-year-old evidence is not enough to convict a man like that, but it was more than enough to end everything else he had built. Nobody went to prison over 1998. I want to tell you that plainly before anything else, because if you have stayed with me this long, you deserve the truth and not the ending you were hoping for. 27 years is too long a road for most of the law to walk. The statute had run on nearly everything that mattered. Gil Marchetti was never charged with the fire on Ellery Street, and I have made a kind of peace with that, though it took longer than 3 weeks, and I am not finished making it, even now. What he lost instead was everything he had built on top of it. I packed the house in November, and that is where the rest of this story actually lives, if you want the truth of it. Not in a courtroom, but in a series of boxes on a Saturday afternoon, each one pulling a piece of news along behind it like a burr caught on a sleeve. The wedding photograph, face down in a box marked "Kitchen," brought the news about Rosalind. The divorce was final. The house sold at a fair price to a young family from Savannah, and she had not gotten rich off any of it. She called once in October, not to apologize. I do not believe she has fully understood yet what there is to apologize for, but to ask if I was eating. I told her I was. That was the whole call. The baseball glove child size brought Dean. He left Buford in September and has not come back. I do not have an address for him. Marisol says he calls her sometimes late and does not say much, and she does not press him because she understands better than I ever did that some doors need to be left unlocked rather than knocked on. The phone rang while I was taping a box shut, and it was Marisol telling me Cy had died. A stroke in his sleep, 3 months after that stage on Ellery Street. He had given a sworn deposition 6 weeks earlier, the tape, the timeline, all of it on the record, under oath, with a court reporter typing every word. He got to say it once, formally, before he went. I think that mattered to him more than almost anything else in his life. Lonnie Pruitt testified too. He pled to a reduced charge arson, resulting in death, and the judge gave him 18 months, suspended, in light of his age, his cooperation, and 27 years without so much as a parking ticket. I sat in that courtroom and watched a 67-year-old man weep with something that looked less like fear and more like relief. Marchetti Development lost its financing within 6 weeks of that stage. The investors read the same room I did. The Department of Insurance opened a review of 3 other claims tied to his companies going back a decade, and that review is still open, and may still cost him more than Ellery Street ever could. I kept one thing out of the house before I sold it. Photograph 11. It sits in a frame now on a shelf where anybody can see it. I moved into a smaller place 1 street back from the water, with a porch that catches the morning light. Odalis and I have coffee there most Saturdays. Not friends exactly. Not anything with an easy name. She wears her father's watch now. She had it repaired and it runs again, and she told me once that hearing it tick felt strange for the first month, and then felt like nothing at all, which she said was the best way she knew to describe getting older. Marisol brings her daughter by on Sundays. My granddaughter is 8 months old, and has just discovered she has a voice and uses it constantly. And I have never in my life been so grateful for noise in a quiet house. In September, a postcard came. No signature. Postmarked North Carolina. A photograph of a lighthouse on the front, nothing written on the back but 3 words. I'm all right. I did not need the handwriting analyzed. I know my son's hand. I keep it on the same shelf as photograph 11. I have not answered it because I do not know the address, and some part of me thinks that not knowing may be its own kind of mercy for both of us. Here is what I believed most of my life, standing in that garage at 56 years old, with my hand on a shelf I would not reach for. That some things are better left unlooked at. That a careful man protects the people he loves by not disturbing what is quiet. I do not believe that anymore. I have learned at 57 the difference between not looking and mercy. They wear the same clothes. They are not the same thing. Not looking does not protect anybody. It only delays the bill and lets the interest run, and hands the final invoice to somebody who had no say in whether the debt got made in the first place. A girl who was 7, a boy who needed a father and got a careful man instead. A wife who found the space I left standing empty and let somebody else stand in it. The truth does not heal anything by itself. I want to be honest about that because I have heard people say otherwise and I no longer believe them. What the truth does is smaller and harder than healing. It stops the lying. That is all. It closes the file. And then you are left the way I am left, on a porch with a cup of coffee and a watch that runs again, and a postcard with no address to write back to, doing the actual work of living in a house you finally let yourself see. If you have ever caught yourself standing in your own kitchen, deciding not to ask the question you already knew the answer to, I would like to hear about it. Not because I have any wisdom left to offer you, only because I spent 27 years thinking I was the only one, and I have come to understand a little late that I almost certainly was not.